Thank you very much for joining us. The Columbian is pleased to welcome candidates for representative position number 1 from the 18th Legislative District. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor, and I'll let Craig introduce himself.
Good morning, I'm Craig Brown. I'm the Columbian's editor.
And a member of the editorial board. And then, and Callie. You're on mute.
Starting off with the ultimate team meeting fail. My name is Callie Hare. I cover politics for the Columbian. I'll be watching and reporting on this meeting, but I won't be asking questions or participating.
Thank you. And then, as mentioned, we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website and our YouTube channel. And now let's move on to the candidates. Please take 1 to 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and give a brief background on why you are running, and then we will move on to specific policy questions. And we'll start with Brandon.
Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Brandon Vick. I am your state representative in the 18th District, position 1, and I've been so for 8 years now. The reason I'm running is pretty simple. I think first, we have unfinished business that we need to complete, and secondly, I think we're in a time where the skills and the knowledge that I've developed over the last 8 years are going to be particularly helpful. The state's in a bind. And a lot of that is due to what has been the result of COVID and the various shutdowns. And we're going to go back to Olympia and need to find about $4.5 billion with which to get the state back on track. I think a lot of that's going to have to be through smart budgeting and cuts. And we're going to have to realize that we're in this situation that is a result of a virus and is temporary. It's not a long-term problem. I think our underlying economy is good. And if we all tighten our belts and get back to the work that we know how to do, I think we'll recover just fine. There's another mantra out there that says we need to fix the state through taxes and progressive taxes and more corporate taxes. And I think we see, how that's working. On top of the economics and the budgetary items, I think I've shown that I can deliver for Southwest Washington, be it projects, be it transportation, be it just representing the values of people in the district. 8 years is a good career, and you learn a lot and you gain a lot of knowledge and you learn how to work in the system. We have, again, plenty to do. We have plenty that's unaccomplished, and I just look forward to serving for another 2 years.
Great, thank you. And Kassandra.
Hi, I'm Kass Bessert. I'm from Battleground, Washington. I've lived here most of my life. I have done a lot of work in politics around the country. I do a lot of work remotely for national candidates, and would not be jumping into a race as a candidate if I didn't think there was a massive need. My background is much more like the background side of politics. I do a lot of data work. I do a lot of kind of nuts and bolts stuff to make sure that things get done. And I'm from Battleground and I'm from the 18th, and these are my favorite places in the world. The reason, and this is going to be a little personal because I really wouldn't be doing this unless I thought it needed to be done. COVID has been massive. I was out camping and with the weekend that it hit Seattle in the San Juans, and as soon as I was driving through Seattle, senior citizens were getting it in residences. And when we started locking down, that was a big shakeup. And then I started getting news of friends catching it in different places. And one of my friends who caught it was just this wonderful man named Tim, and he caught a fever. And before they could get it tested, he got it tested on Thursday and passed away Saturday before he could get his results back. So that happens in March. And then the next couple of weeks, my representative files a case saying that the scientific, medically proven phasing plan isn't going to cut it. And a case that eventually ends up proving to be fairly frivolous just gets me fairly irate, and I look for something to do. And through the community, I'm being told that we need someone to run. And I feel like I've got the background to be a pretty great advocate in Olympia, just by virtue of being able to knock on doors and really follow through on what's needed in the area. And I've seen a deficit of leadership out of our district in the 18th for quite a while, and would love to start seeing some strong policies come down that directly benefit us. So that's why I'm running, and I look forward to digging into some of the policy here.
Great. Well, thanks again to both of you for joining us. Let me apologize in advance. I have a sometimes shaky connection here, so if I ask you to repeat something, that's why. Sometimes it goes in and out. Brandon, let's start with something that Cass mentioned. You filed suit against the governor regarding the shutdown orders. Is that accurate? Is that the accurate way to put it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good general way to put it. Me, several other representatives, and several community members, but yeah.
What was the reasoning behind that?
You know, I think if you asked each person, they'd have their own reason. Now, for me, you know, it's not so much about the fact that, you know, COVID isn't real. I think it's very real. And I think, you know, many of the protections we've taken have made sense. But for me, the overall point that I was trying to get at is, look, we're 7.5 million people as a state. And we have one individual who's guiding us, if you want to call it guiding, through this pandemic. And I don't think that's the right way to do it. We have 147 elected individuals who are perfectly capable of meeting and negotiating and coming up with good decisions that actually represent the people in their smaller segments of the community. So yes, absolutely, the lawsuit was filed. I don't regret the fact that it was filed. I still think that we should be in Olympia, or should have been in Olympia, to try and address some of these issues, because, you know, what we're seeing is, you know, the shutdown aspect, which could be keeping people healthy, but what we're not seeing addressed is the other side of the coin. What's happening to all the small businesses, the restaurants, the factories? What's happening to these folks who are losing their livelihoods and their savings? There is a balance out there, and we haven't found that balance, and that's what I think the legislature could do, is provide that balance.
What has the lawsuit been decided? Your particular suit, what was the result of that?
Yeah, the lawsuit was dismissed. There was two reasons the judge gave. First, the filing was in federal court, and the judge said that this was not a federal issue, and so you know, take it up with a state court, I guess, if you want. And the second reason was that the governor's office had proclaimed that the governor is not able to enforce these orders, therefore we were suing the wrong person. The logic there was that, well, the governor is not going to give you a penalty, but the Department of Health might give you a penalty. So we would sue the Department of Health or whatever agency is responsible there. That was odd to me, since the governor is the director, the head honcho of all those organizations. But those were the two reasons given by the judge. Now,
have you participated in any rallies or protests about the shutdown orders, as some other representatives have?
Yeah, no, I haven't. I mean, like I said, I believe COVID's real, and I don't believe that it makes sense for me or my family to, you know, go out and take on unnecessary risk. You know, I'm not sure that I blame anybody that does. I think there's a lot of very strong feelings and a lot of different beliefs. But for me, you know, we are taking it as seriously as we can, without being scared of life, without being scared of the outdoors. But no, I haven't been to any rallies.
And again, I ask that because I know some other representatives have done that. Cass, what do you think about the governor's shutdown orders? Was that the right move? How would you have responded to that if you were in the legislature?
I think listening to as many epidemiologists as you possibly can for something like this is really important, particularly because as we started responding to it, we didn't know what we were looking at. We didn't have a lot of information. So making sure that you're involving the scientific community, the medical community, the public health community as fast as you possibly can is step one. And I think there was an attempt to have the legislature involved that didn't resolve well, apparently. But the phased program seems to be the most reasonable approach, the most reasonable structure. I don't know that I agree with every specific aspect of it. Particularly when we have different public entities that are able to operate, putting those employees at risk while other employees may, who are in the private sector, are subject to different rules. So that was unusual to me, but everything else seemed pretty reasonable. One of the things that I would like to see is more stress in places like Clark County and places that are more populated on meeting the actual metrics. I think that we get a lot of details on what the phase plans are and what is allowed in each different phase, but really like telling people and communicating out, hey, we need to hit our 25 per 100,000 COVID cases or 100,000 people mark, right? Like we need to hit our testing marks. We need to hit our case marks because we know that we're good on beds. We know that we're good on a bunch of different metrics for the next application, but I don't know that we are as a community being pushed towards success. And I think that there are ways to do that. And we're seeing those being implemented in other counties, like Yakima County is getting a very aggressive programming. And I'd like to see that programming pushed towards everybody so we can get out of this as fast as we can.
Now, how do we approach the budget? As Brandon mentioned, we're looking at a $4.5 billion shortfall between now and mid-2023. How would you address that? Would you look at additional taxes or cutting programs or a combination of both?
I would agree with what Donna said to you guys last week, which table. My priorities, so you know where I'm coming from in all this, is we have a lot of options in our budget to not in our budget, I'm sorry, in our tax system to create progressive programming or to create progressive taxes. One of the things that I'm looking at particularly is the deductions in the B&O taxes, not the taxes themselves, but the actual deductions. It seems to kind of be a landing spot for where all of the lobbyists have like started to write their own line items in, and some of those things make sense. And as far as like industries with massive overhead and small profit margins, but some of them are things like giving huge deductions to Coca-Cola or Pepsi. And those are things that we can probably start to cut out. But
so you would close some of those?
Absolutely.
That would be your preference?
That would be my preference, and making sure that it was lined and tiered out in a progressive way so that big companies are paying the most and people who need the help, who are small businesses, who are more local, are seeing more benefit.
Brandon, how do we approach the budget?
Well, I think I touched on it in my intro, but I think we're dealing with a budget situation that I truly believe is temporary. It's temporary because of the shutdowns. I think the underlying economy still is good and still can be good. So I think the solutions we have to come up with should also be temporary. There have been calls for increased taxes, and you look at that situation, or at least I do, and I ask myself, who's that money coming from? It's coming from the people who are being hammered right now because of COVID and because of the lockdowns. I mean, I guess you could tax Amazon and Microsoft through the nose, but they're going to have another option, right? I mean, we just saw it with Boeing to some extent. They're consolidating and moving. We live in a global economy, and these companies don't have to stay in Seattle. They don't have to stay in Bellevue. And so taking these taxes to the big guys, to me, doesn't make any more sense. They're the term deductions coming up, and I assume that was more along the lines of preferential tax rates because there aren't deductions in the B&O tax. But I look at that differently too. We set tax rates for each industry based on, I think, how we value them, or at least how we should. There's a reason that aerospace has a lower tax rate. It's not because we did a giveaway, it's because that's what we need to have them here and competitive. There's a reason that newspapers have a lower B&O tax rate. It's because we see value in having news, and taxing them to the nose is going to give us less news. So I don't think raising tax rates on anybody makes sense right now. We've bumped the B&O from 1.5 to 1.8 on service industry for higher education. I was not supportive of that, but that was something that just happened 2 years ago. Taxes haven't been going down. They've been going up. The state budget's doubled since I've been elected. I don't claim that, but it's happened. We don't have a tax problem. We don't have a money problem. We have a spending problem. And I think the cuts that need to be made need to happen for the short term. Like I said earlier, we need to tighten our belts, get through COVID, and then get back on our way.
So if it were just up to you, what would you cut?
Well, I think there would have to be a little bit of austerity. I think if everyone, tightens their belt to a certain percentage, I think that makes sense. I think we have to look at a number of the programs that, are newer. One of the newer programs, for example, would be the free college tuition program. I think that money could be better spent in the short term, bridging the budget gap, because that's such a new program and people haven't, really jumped on the bandwagon and taken advantage of that yet. I think there's a number of detailed things. I think what absolutely needs to be protected are disabled. I think education and I think public safety are where you start. Safety is where you start the protections, and then you see what's left. That's my start, anyways.
Okay.
And I will say there are deductions in the B&O tax. That's just Chapter 8204. 433 is going to be where those deductions start. So you can look around.
B&O paid on gross revenues. So.
Dig into the details of that. Brandon, you were on the governor's Business Recovery Legislative Task Force. Is that still going, and what has been learned?
Oh, no, that's not still going at all. I think we met maybe 4 or 5 times. The governor never showed up to it. He sent his staff to it. I think that's unfortunately what's been happening with this administration. You had 8 legislators on that task force, 2 Republican senators, 2 Republican House members, same for the Democrats. And actually, everyone asked very hard questions. People, like I said earlier, why the legislature needs to come back. We were hearing from our constituents as to the pain they were experiencing, and that we needed to do things to open back up quicker. At least 7 of 8 of us expressed that to the governor, and all of a sudden the meetings are canceled. So no, they haven't gone on since, I would guess, May, maybe June. But yeah, it started quickly and ended quickly.
Yeah. Craig?
Sure. Where do you stand on referendum 90? So I guess we'll start with Cass.
Sure. Sex ed is really important. Health classes are wildly important. The proposed education plan that they've got gives parents a lot of freedom and choice, and I think that there's plenty of opportunity for local input. I'm really satisfied with what they've put forward. It's nothing that Mr. Rogers or Doc McStuffins wouldn't, put out there. So I don't see. I am struggling to see a lot of the controversy, and I think a lot of that's probably because of the misinformation that's been out there. So so I support the health classes.
Okay. How about you, Brandon?
Yeah, for me, we. And when I say we, I mean the legislature as a whole, tried to fix a problem that wasn't broken, and quite honestly, riled up a lot of us, rightfully so in that respect. We have local school boards, we have local governments, we have these local entities, again, closest to the people, who have been able, since the beginning of school districts, to set the curriculum that best reflects their constituency and their students. In Battleground, we have kind of one of the premier examples of a place where robust sexual education wasn't wanted by the parents, and they didn't have it. So I kind of view it as a system to get around that local voice and that local vote. So no, I'll be voting to repeal that legislation. I think it's bad legislation. I don't think we have an overwhelming problem, and I think listening to the people makes the most sense.
And
So
I think
if a particular district didn't want to include a math curriculum, okay with that? It should be up to the individuals.
I don't think it's about whether or not you have math. I think it's about what kind of math that you have, and is that the math that the community, is agreeable with.
Kassandra, you're going to say?
Yeah, well, I will say that the anti-health advocates out here did a great job getting a bunch of very noisy people to show up at school districts, and that's fine. Good job on advocacy. However, the actual public health in Battleground is hit by sex ed, and I grew up not just with plenty of people who transmitted and had STIs in high school, but also middle schoolers who were pregnant. It's not a good scene if you don't have the resources. So I think that we've seen how abstinence-only education hits us. We've seen that increases in information in science-based and consent-based education helps. And I just think it's outrageous not to give people a hand up when they need it. Especially when it's as easy as just saying, here's some curriculum, here's some study suggestions. And we're going to tell every single parent what's going to be on this curriculum. We're going to tell every parent, you have the shot to opt your kid out if you don't want them getting this information this way. You have every choice available to you. And we're just making sure that the playing field is level.
And then, Brandon, isn't the specific curriculum, doesn't that remain up to the individual district?
The specific curriculum within a handful of choices presented by OSPI. And I think that's where a lot of constituents have found their concern is in what is included in that curriculum. It's not so much the nuts and bolts of what sentence are going to be said, but what the possibilities are. I mean, I think there is definitely concern. I've heard plenty of it with what do you teach a kindergartner, right? Is it just that somebody shouldn't touch you? That's probably good. Is it the more graphic version? That's where people will get, concerned. I think there's a time and place for all these decisions. I don't think anybody, at least on this call, is advocating for, a stick your head in the sand and pretend like nothing's happening approach. But I think the scale and the appropriateness is of huge concern. If the law were just if the law were just got feedback there. If the law were just that you have to have some health curriculum, I don't think we're having this discussion. But when you have to pick from these 3 or 4 or however many there are, and there are glaring problems, that's a problem for me.
I'm curious, let's move on and let's talk about the I-5 bridge and/or additional crossings. Cass, what would be your preference?
I think my preference would just be improving the I-5 bridge as fast as we possibly can. We already have the easements and the groundwork laid for improvement on the I-5 bridge. I'm not discounting any third crossings or anything like that, but that's going to be 20 years down the road. There's a definite urgency to solve this problem, and I think our best bet at something that resolves itself quickly and affordably is going to be improving the I-5 bridge itself. So I think that is something that I meet with a lot of urgency as someone who's been a commuter out to Beaverton myself. That commute is brutal, and the sooner we can fix it, the better.
Just a quick clarifying question. By improve, you mean replace, not try to improve the current bridge, right?
Thank you for that clarification. Yes, I do. Okay. I do mean replace.
That's what I thought you were meaning, but I just want to make sure.
Brandon, what would be your preferred approach?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as a vice chair of the Bridge Replacement Committee, I think I-5 definitely is the most realistic and pressing option. I do think an all above approach is necessary as well, because our 2 communities aren't shrinking. Where I think the danger is in this bridge conversation is that we get to a point where we say, any bridge at any cost, and that's where I keep putting my advocacy towards. We need a solution that is not only affordable for our citizens, but one that actually solves something. I'm not as worried about the major earthquake. I think that's something to keep in the back of your mind, but I don't think that's tomorrow's problem. So when we rebuild this bridge, when we get the new corridor figured out, it needs to be something that not only is affordable, but represents the values of our constituents and actually improves commute times. I would hate to be in office when this bridge is done and have people look at me and say, you spent $2, $3, $4 billion and I'm sitting in traffic longer. My goods and services are getting to market in a longer amount of time. It has to be the right bridge, and so that's what we're going to keep fighting for. I think the process is going well. We've done well meeting with Oregon. The conversations have gone very well. We're still a long way from the finish line, no doubt about it. But I think we could get to a solution that, quite honestly, everyone agrees to.
Yeah, you say you want something that's affordable. How do you define that?
Well, I think affordable obviously is in the eye of the beholder, right? But I think when you start talking about what is affordable, it's more in the how it's paid for. Right? I think things like tolls are obviously going to be a big question at the end of the day. Are there tolls? There might be. Are the tolls $1 or $2, or are they congestion pricing at $5, $8, $10? Right? I think it has to make sense for the average taxpayer. Is it an extra 25 cents a gallon? That's a problem. So these things cost real money. There's no doubt about it. Honestly, I think there's better ways for us to address our transportation budget. But I think, it's going to be, what does it look like at the end of the day? I don't have a dollar figure for you. It's not like I need a $1 billion bridge, but it's got to be able to be handled by the folks using it.
Sure. And for you personally, what would be your preference on tolls? What would be an acceptable amount, or would you insist there be no tolls?
I don't know that I'd insist on that, but again, I think there's much better options. I think, quite frankly, in our entire budget scheme, we could do much better. We could take a percentage of our state's growth combined with capital budget money and do things with road preservation and construction. I think that, if there is a toll, again, there's got to be a value, because if we're just charging money for a new bridge and you're not getting anything out of it that you weren't getting the day before, that's a problem. So I don't have a dollar figure for you, but as low as possible, if not.
Kassandra, do you believe that climate change is occurring? Is it exacerbated by human activity, and what should the legislature do about it?
Yeah, I was ready to answer a toll question.
Sorry.
Yeah, climate change is very real. I don't know that that's a question too much anymore. But yeah, it's very real, and it's something that clearly started to have real world impacts on us, and more than just a couple of warm summers. The wildfires that we've seen lately are brought on by climate change. Dry air going into just brush and setting forests on fire is a very real and tangible effect of climate change. So I support the 2030 carbon neutral goals that we've put out. And I think that continuing to be a national leader and an international example in Washington State is where we should be going with that. And obviously I support continued responsible practices in our forestry.
And would you have supported the governor's Clean Fuels initiative?
So the 2030 goal, or is that a different thing?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Then I am equally unsure.
Okay. Brandon, your climate change?
Well, I think something that's pretty interesting in Washington State is that the health of our environment isn't actually a partisan issue. I think we all live here for a reason, and it's because we get to look outside and go walk and hike and do all those great things. Do I believe climate change is real? I do. Do we probably disagree with each other on the severity of it? I think that's probably true too. But look, if humans weren't here, I think the world would be in a lot different shape. So what I'm getting at here is I think being responsible and conscientious is very important. Where I have a trouble in the legislative process, and we pass a law that's punitive. We pass a law that says, hey, you've been in business in Washington for 50 years. Now you have to completely change it. I think as we continue to deal with whether or the environment, or whatever you want to call it, we need to do things that are more proactive. We need to say new industries that come along are going to follow a certain set of guidelines. We need to say that, we have a certain set of standards that are going to be in place as we grow. And we're going to let folks who have done business and helped build our state and had jobs continue to do the things that they're good at as well. As for the fuel standard, that wasn't the same bill. It was a very different bill. It was a bill that I think was very bad because what we have to do in the legislature is find balance. And balance is between our, utopia and our reality. And that fuel standard was going to be a very expensive bill. It was going to take the folks who were, barely able to pay for gas to make that gas unaffordable. The thing that I think we forget is, to have an electric car or to have a very fuel efficient car, you probably have to be situated pretty well financially. But the person who's, making it to their hourly job, barely scraping by, driving the car that has, 5 of 6 cylinders working, that's the person that is going to get hammered by something like a clean fuel standard. It's not just about going and getting an associate's degree and getting a better job. It's not just about, ponying up and buying a new car. It's about the real consequences for the folks on the margin. So I didn't support that bill. I won't support that bill. But again, I think our climate strategy is more forward looking. Look, we're the greenest state in the country per capita now that our coal power is offline. That's something we should celebrate. It doesn't mean we quit, but it doesn't mean we keep punishing either.
Is it punishing, or is it benefiting the entire state and all citizens?
Well, I think you have a point of diminishing returns, right? I mean, can our air get cleaner? It's possible it could get cleaner, but again, at what expense, right? I mean, do we eliminate our manufacturing industry because that makes our air cleaner? I don't think that's a good idea. Do we eliminate, our Georgia Pacific mill because we think that makes the air cleaner? I don't think that's a good idea. So again, it's balance. I mean, utopia would be great, but that's not an option that we have.
Craig, you have anything?
Sure. Do you support your candidate or your party's candidates for president and governor, and what do you see as their strengths and weaknesses?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I think I was echoing. So do you support your candidates or your party's candidates for president and governor, and what do you see as those candidates' strengths and weaknesses? You want to start, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to both those questions is yes. It's not my business to defend Donald Trump, but at the same time, I think that there's been a lot of good done, especially around the economy and deregulation. I think there's been actually quite a bit of positive as far as the world stage, right? I mean, when was the last time we had a president that didn't start a war or have an active war going? I think that's a pretty good thing. I think
he has an active war going.
He's got active wars going.
He does. You're right. And I should have stayed with started war. We have, I think, been to a level where we're not having folks challenge us as much in the national stage. I think things are generally going well, and I think pre-COVID, our average citizen's pocketbook was reflective of that. As far as the governor, look, I think I don't actually know Lauren Culp. I haven't met Lauren Culp, but I have worked with Governor Inslee for 8 years, and I know I can't cast my vote there.
Do you think that Trump's trade policies have been good for Washington? His tariffs?
Well, no, I think tariffs in general are something that I'm not a huge fan of. I do believe much more in free trade. At the same time, you do have to, at some point, figure out when you're being taken advantage of. I don't pretend to know everything there is to know, or heck, probably half what there is to know about international trade. But there are definitely decisions I would do differently, and I think that's true with a lot of Republicans, locally or globally. I think there's things I do differently, but on the whole, I think economically we're doing pretty well.
Do you think his rollback protections are good for Washington?
I missed the middle.
Do you think back of environmental protection and good for Washington State?
Rollback of environmental protections?
Yeah.
I don't know that they've been bad. I mean, I think the rollback is not so much, hey, go dump fluids into the river. I think the rollback is, hey, we went too far. This doesn't make sense. Let's get to a place that makes sense, and again, find that balance. So I don't think it's been bad for Washington State. I'll say that.
Okay, Cass, will you support your party's candidates for governor and president?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely think that our current system is not working. Our current president walked in with a full majority in House, Senate, and Supreme Court that was very supportive. Nothing for 2 years, and we still don't have a bridge. It was infrastructure every single week for weeks, and we still don't have a new I-5 bridge. We have no federal funding. The Obama administration did more on that in their first, 3 months, getting us a stimulus package that actually gave us some transportation options. We have nothing from these guys. So that's my local, tangent. And as far as the president himself, clearly lots of disagreements there. And for Joe Biden, I was on the road with the Obama campaign in 08. I was an independent. I was not a Democrat at that point. And I was on board with Barack Obama because he was someone who spoke about his faith openly and freely. And Joe Biden does the same thing in a very tangible way, and he has a very affecting personal story with priorities that I agree with. We're not on the same page with everything, but he's someone that I know is going to make moral judgments, and I appreciate that. And for governor, I know I'm in disagreement here with my my colleague. However, I do think that Jay Inslee has at least put structures in place. He's listening to the right people. Our mortality rate for COVID is lower than most of the states in the nation. And we were one of the first outbreak sites. And we account for less than 1% of the current fatalities. So I'm okay continuing with that. And I haven't seen anything from Culp that's been particularly compelling. So that's where I'm at.
Now, follow up on that, Brandon. Compared to most states, Washington does have pretty good numbers regarding COVID deaths and infections. Isn't that a plus on how the governor has approached this?
With COVID specifically, I mean, I think, look, in the first 30 days, I think you could have found maybe not unanimous agreement, but quite a bit of agreement with all legislators as to how things have been handled. And I think by getting on it early, we were able to stave off a lot of that. Again, we're in a position now, though, where we have no end date, right? I mean, we don't know when there's a vaccine. We don't know who's going to take a vaccine. We don't know, if this thing peters out on its own. There's a lot of things we just don't know. We've been told it's not going to peter out on its own. And so I think where we're at now, and where we've been for probably a few months now, is yes, our infection rates are down more. But what do you expect when you lock down the system? Do we lock down the system for 12 months, for 18 months, for 24 months? Your damage done from that is immeasurable, not to mention suicides, not to mention bankruptcies, not to mention domestic violence, not to mention lost education, not to mention all these, non-financial things. And so, again, early on, shut it down, quarantine Seattle, great idea. Now, I think we're going backwards. Maybe not on the infection side, but on
Kassandra, what about that? What about the collateral damage and the other impact of the shutdown? Is that worth it?
I mean, it's a bad situation. It's not worth it. I don't think there's anything that is worth that. I think that's a false dichotomy. I think we're hit with a national tragedy. We're hit with a national emergency, and this is not a tit for tat situation. This is a prioritization situation. So if you are on the edge, if you're going to lose your home, your health is in danger, your livelihood is in danger, your family may not be secure right now, those are the programs that we need to be funding. Those are the programs that we need to be getting people access to immediately. It can't be an either or. It can't be we're going to take care of COVID or we're going to take care of our people. It has to be both. And I think prioritizing small business owners and small businesses is huge. They're our biggest employer. And I think my prioritization in looking at the budget is going to be making sure that social safety net is taken care of and that we're moving forward in a way that is going to get people back to work safely, but with a real emphasis on that safety.
All right, thank you. Greg, anything else?
What about the state effort on wildfire suppression and prevention? Is that adequate? And so what would you advocate the legislature do? I know this is a DNR question, but the legislature, of course, funds the DNR. So, Brandon, you want to start with that, please?
Well, I think obviously the answer is no, it's not adequate. We are seeing lots of land burn, and this year was a little different too, where we saw a lot of grasslands burn. It was very interesting from the mouth of our DNR director early on that there are X amount of fires and there have been no lightning strikes, right? So where are those fires coming from? That's an interesting question. DNR, in my opinion, and not opinion in the statute, is meant to manage our public lands for the public good, and that means logging, and that means selling, and that means clearing. And I'd say we're doing a very poor job as far as that's concerned. We used to have a system where we were kind of symbiotic with our logging community, and they go clear the underbrush and get to take one out of every so many trees, and we had happy, healthy forests. And now it's almost like protecting a spotted owl is more important than what we actually to do with our land. So I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done with our public lands. And I think we also need to realize that while our state public lands need a lot of help in cleaning and keeping healthy, we are a state that is surrounded by and encapsulates a lot of federal land. It doesn't do a whole lot of good to have healthy state forests and sick federal forests. So again, this is a team effort. This is where we continue to work with our federal partners. But no, I think our forest lands not only need to be managed better, they need to be put back into production, because that money that we used to get, we get now to a lesser extent, that's what funded schools, that's what funded programs, that's what funded the state, or at least a portion of the state budget, and that number keeps shrinking and keeps shrinking.
Okay, thank you. Cass?
Yeah, I think I've picked up a lot from different forest firefighters and people that are in Battleground who are do a lot of smoke jumping and do a lot of forestry work. My mom actually works at Casey, which is an agro and environmental education facility in Battleground School District, and she thinks and talks a lot about this. So there's a lot of dinner conversations about this, but I will say the big takeaways seem to be making sure that our forestry services have consistent funding is going to make sure that they can do long-term planning well in a way that keeps us all safe. So I think that's going to be a priority for me in the legislature, is making sure that these safety programs have consistent funding. As well as making sure that forestry management is coming from a place that pays attention to biologists as well as public safety advocates. And yeah, prioritizing wildfires. The federal lands are being partially managed by DNR, so that's been helpful. And I think continuing to keep that cohesive approach is helpful.
Great, thank you. Craig, anything else?
So I'm always full of questions. What about the state's approach to mental health care and the loss of accreditation at Western State Hospital? I know there's some new efforts underway on that. What is being done and what should be done? Cass, do you have any information on that?
Yeah, I think the approach, there was a proposal that smaller facilities be put up, and then the people who are being placed at Western were primarily going to stay there for those who had been court ordered. And then everybody else was going to be moved to facilities that were more locally available. So they'd be smaller and in the areas where people actually were. And that resonates with me. I think you want to make sure that Western is quite a tangled little knot. And I think when your staff doesn't feel safe, it's very difficult to make sure that people are able to heal. And what you want out of those mental health facilities is mental health and people being able to heal, to get to a place where they can stabilize and move on to the next spot that they want. And if they need long-term care, we want to also have that option available for people. So I support, long story short, I support moving people to smaller areas when it makes sense and doing whatever we can to get that federal accreditation back, because that is a substantial hole in their budget.
Okay, thank you. Brandon, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, Western's an absolute mess, and I think we all wish on a bipartisan basis the governor would do more about it. But look, I think I said this 2 years ago jokingly, but I mean it today. I think Western would make a great McMinimans. It's not a good place to house those in need. I mean, it's an old building, it's a decrepit building, it's a building that we can't get up to current standards. This is not an indictment on the staff. I think the staff is doing whatever they can, but not being given the tools to do it with. We're always probably going to have a need for housing for some of our most severe patients with mental health. And I think, honestly, that's in a new facility. We can find grant money for that. We're going to spend a little bit of our own money for that. But not only is it the right thing to do, it's a legally mandated thing for us to do. You know, there's a lot of new science, a lot of new research. I mean, we don't need brick and mortar buildings in certain spots of the states to lock people away in now when they have mental health crisis. I mean, we can take a lot more of this on locally. We can trust parents and family in a lot of circumstances to help us out here while paying them to do so. I think those are a lot of better options. But Western itself, again, you know, didn't have a couple beer gardens and, you know, a nice movie theater. It'd be a great.
So you would be in favor of a new central facility, but still also the regional facilities as well?
You know, I think that's going to be a capacity issue. I mean, I think if we could do it in a regional facility, I think that would make much more sense. You know, where does the money come from? What does the grant money look like? What are the federal strings? I mean, I think there's a lot more questions there. I would prefer regional for sure. Just have to get those details ironed out.
Sure. Great. Thank you. You know, let's move on. And why don't you give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and feel free to mention any notable endorsements if you like. We'll start with Brandon.
Well, thanks again. And I appreciate not only the interview and the invitation, but I appreciate being able to serve. You know, it might sound cliche, but just doing this job and being elected to this job really is an honor. And it's amazing to learn the stories of so many different people. We represent somewhere in the ballpark of 150,000 people. And, you know, not everyone is so concerned about, you know, the big topic du jour of the day. They're concerned about where their next meal's coming from. They're concerned about their unemployment check recently. They're concerned about, you know, a whole host of things that are are so much smaller on the debate stage, but so personal to them. And I like to think our office and myself have done a fantastic job of meeting people where they are and helping them get the solutions that they need. You know, I early on talked about my experience, and I think that's not the only qualifier, but I think it's an important qualifier because we're coming up on pretty extreme times when, especially with the budget is concerned. You know, I was elected right when we were coming out of the last recession, and we've learned a lot. Unfortunately, I think we've also forgotten a lot, and it's time to really put that knowledge and that memory to work and get the best solutions for people. You know, Washington is a fantastic place to live. Again, I think we're not forced to live here. We live here for a reason, and we can maintain our charm and our uniqueness while still being responsible. And I think that's what we need. We need to trust people in all aspects of life. We need to encourage success and creativity, and you know, we need to make a system where people want to go out and create that next Microsoft, that next Amazon, and I think that's something that, you know, I'm going to keep fighting for. You know, Clark County is a great place. We're unique with Oregon just to our south, and I think we have a lot of good left to do. So again, I'm proud of what I've done. I hope the constituents realize that, and I do ask them for another 2 years in office.
Great, thank you. Cass, give us your final pitch.
Sure. So I am, again, I want to encourage everybody to vote the entire ticket. We have very high-profile races at the top with our presidential and our governor races, and we have some very vital races from the legislature all the way down to the people who are running on the as freeholder candidates for the county charter review. So vote the whole ticket. If you made it this far in the video, you're already a wildly informed voter, and I appreciate you so much. I am a lifelong resident. I have been living in Battleground in North County for a long time. I'd be excited to represent Camas, Washougal, Ridgefield, the Center, Battleground, Vancouver. I want the opportunity to make sure that we get through this crisis and back to work safely in a way that does not spawn a recession. We are still in the woods on this, and we're so close to getting out of it. I just want to make sure that North County has somebody in the legislature who has felt what it's like to be through a recession out here and knows what it's like when you don't totally know where the next check is coming from, and what that instability can be like, and still love where you are. I want to keep people in their homes. I want to make sure that the eviction stays and the foreclosure stays continue. I want that housing security to be around, and I want to make sure that our housing inventory goes up so that people, when they are ready to move from where they are, have a place to be out here. And I want to make sure that our unemployment insurance is stable, and that if that's something you need, it's there for you, and that our healthcare, which is going to be challenged in November, stays stable through the next 2 years, particularly while we continue to deal with COVID cleanup. And I want to make sure that public health is being funded across the state as well as at the county level, so that we don't have Eileen Queering going, we don't have the money to pay for this through October. We don't know how to chase these contacts. We need to be able to trace all of this stuff. And if that funding needs to come from the state, let's make it come from the state. We don't have time to mess around with this. I just want to make sure that this all plays out in a way that the community and the people I care about remain safe and healthy and stable financially. So that's why I'm going to ask for your vote this November with the legislature. And if you need anything from me, Bassard4rep4.com. I'm around on Facebook as well. Always happy to answer questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks to both of you. Good luck.